Welcome to Lecture 1 of PCN214. This is part 1 of Lecture 1, so this is broken down into a few different smaller presentations. Okay, so in this we're just going to have a little bit of a look at or a bit of an introductory look at PCN214, or more particularly radiation protection. So this is just an introductory lecture. So all of this week is an introductory lecture. We're just going to look at the topics of radiation safety and radiation protection. So we'll have some examples of different aspects of radiation protection and why that is important. We're going to cover who makes us bother with radiation protection, what are the guidelines to go about it, what are the basic philosophies, and some of the units. So that'll be covered over 3 mini lectures today. The publications used for this lecture are the ICRP publications. So ICRP is an international Commission for Radiological Protection, and they issue all sorts of documents, so they've been around for a long time. They issue documents a couple of times a year, and they can be on all sorts of different topics, but there's the main ones come out maybe every 20-25 years, and these are the general recommendations. So the publications that we generally stick to are ICRP publication number 103, which is the 2007 ICRP recommendations, and then also the ICRP publication number 60, which is the 1990 recommendations. So 2007, that was an update of 1990 general recommendations. We'll also do some exercises throughout the unit from Introduction to Health Physics by December, and various websites as we go along. So who makes us do it? Well, the radiation protection requirements are set by different regulatory authorities. So within Australia you can find them at ARPANSA. So this website here is arpansa.gov.au. So ARPANSA is the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Authority. So the requirements are based on published radiation safety guidelines and codes of practice. So they come from various different sources. So who comes up with the guidelines? There's different national and international organisations. So they include in Queensland the Radiation Health Unit of the Queensland Health Department, and that's their website there. So in Queensland we follow the Radiation Safety Act of 1999, I think it is, and with some various updates. But the Radiation Safety Act comes from recommendations, from Australian recommendations, which is set out by ARPANSA, Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Authority. If you go to the ARPANSA website there, you can find various documents. Internationally, that comes, or the Australian regulations come from international recommendations. So this is the International Commission of Radiological Protection, ICRP, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, and also the World Health Organization. So you can find information on the websites of those places. They contain downloadable publications, and they feed into radiation regulation and codes of practice throughout the world. If you don't have a radiation physics background, if you go to the ARPANSA website, you can find some brief outline under radiation basics. So legislation is guided by these various documents. So like I said before, the main ones that we'll be using is the ICRP 60 recommendations of the ICRP, which looks like that one there, and 103, which is the updated version, which looks like that one there. And I think the previous version from before that was dated around about the 1960s. I'm not quite sure. Maybe someone can look it up. So these give the official scientific view of the effects of radiation on people, and so laws are written about that, around their content. So this unit we're going to be using both of these documents. Nowadays it's more towards ICRP 103 is the main document, but it takes, this was published in 2007, and it takes quite a few years for it to actually, the recommendations to find their way into law. ICRP 60 and ICRP 103 only deal with ionising radiation, not other types, like, for example, it doesn't deal with lasers and that sort of stuff, so only ionising radiation. So they set out the philosophy of radiation protection, quantities used, so like units. We'll cover these later on. Types of expected effects, methods of measuring radiation, so dosimetry, and all sorts of other relevant factors. And it's supported by many other publications. So these are basically ICRP 60 and 103 were set out by a team of experts, going from basically summarising a whole lot of other documents. So we'll look at some of these other documents as we go through the semester. They'll pop in and out of our view. Some of them will. So ICRP 60 and 103, series of recommendations that's been fairly widely accepted by governments in drawing up their own laws and regulations, but they're not always universally accepted. Some countries are slow, some are politically sensitive, and so don't enter into the consensus very quickly. So it's ionising radiation only, encourages the use of radiation with care, not fear. We ensure that risk to people is acceptable, and you have to balance risks and benefits. So protection is for people, and other species of them sort of, if people are safe, then that generally protects other species as well. ICRP 60 also discusses risk. So what's the risk of, if you're exposed to radiation, what's the risk that something bad will happen to you? It says ionising radiation needs to be treated with care rather than fear. Risks need to be kept in perspective with other risks, and we'll cover that later in the semester. I think the last lecture we'll look at that. Have procedures to ensure that radiation is a minor component of the spectrum of risk to which we're all exposed, and generally it is. Alright, so it means that the risk reduction shouldn't be out of proportion to the true risk. So if it was out of proportion, like for example, you might stop all people getting X-rays because X-ray gives radiation, and that has a slight risk with it, but the benefits of getting an X-ray to diagnose a disease far outweigh the risks. So you don't want to go too out of proportion with playing around with risks. So the primary aim of radiation protection is to provide an appropriate standard of protection for people without unduly limiting the beneficial practices giving rise to exposure. So there should be no, the fundamental principle is there should be no exposure to radiation without there being a benefit to the individual who's exposed. So most human activities involve risks and benefits, which need to be balanced to decide whether an activity is worthwhile. For example, you drive to the shop, so there's a risk driving to the shop, but you need food, so the benefit is that you're going to get food. So there's always a risk. So it's a balance of risk and benefit. Alright, so activities involving risk need to be optimised to get the greatest net benefit. So you do have to look at what you can do to reduce the risk but still undertake the activity. So radiation protection is all about this, that sort of stuff. So ICRP 103 is a replacement of ICRP 60, and it's pretty much fully replaced nowadays. There's some differences which will become obvious as we go through. So, for example, ICRP talks about practices and interventions, where ICRP 103 goes to planned situations, existing situations, and emergency situations. So there's a bit of a change in sort of how things are categorised, but generally the way things are generally done are fairly consistent. There's other documents on radiation protection, and these can be found on the websites of the organisations. So that's a quick introduction of where we're going to be going from in this unit, and stay tuned for upcoming presentations.